There's a line that I used in Game of Thrones, that a reader lives 1,000 lives before he dies, and the person who does not read lives only one. And I have lived 1,000 lives. I mean, I've gone to other planets. I've walked in Middle Earth. I've ridden with Ivanhoe in the Crusades and in the tourneys in front of King John. I've adventured with Robin Hood in the forest. I've climbed Mount Everest. I've done all of these things in the pages of the book.
What do you think about children and books and the importance of reading?
Reading is sitting on your parents' lap. Reading is a physical act. A book should be beautiful. Every book that's manufactured should have textures and qualities and smells as though it were a toy, as though it were something precious. And then when you're read to by a parent, mom or pop, and you're sitting on the lap and the body is there, then you have the whole thing. You have the total organization of parent, child, and book, fusion. That's something television or any other form cannot give a human being.
What an astonishing thing a book is. It's a flat object made from a tree with flexible parts on which are imprinted lots of funny dark squiggles. But one glance at it and you're inside the mind of another person. Maybe somebody dead for thousands of years. Across the millennia, an author is speaking clearly and silently inside your head, directly to you. Writing is perhaps the greatest of human inventions, binding together people who never knew each other, citizens of distant epochs. Books break the shackles of time.
Reading requires sitting alone by yourself in a quiet room, and I have friends, intelligent friends, who don't like to read because they get, it's not just bored, there's an almost dread that comes up, I think, here about having to be alone and having to be quiet, and you see that when you walk in. When you walk into most public spaces in America, it isn't quiet anymore. They pipe music through. And the music's easy to make fun of because it's usually really horrible music, but it seems significant that we don't want things to be quiet ever anymore. And to me, I don't know that I could defend it, but that seems to me to have something to do with when you feel like the purpose of your life is to gratify yourself and get things for yourself and go all the time. There's this other part of you that's the same part that can kind of is almost hungry for silence and quiet and thinking really hard about the same thing for maybe half an hour instead of 30 seconds, that doesn't get fed at all. And it makes itself felt in the body in a kind of dread in here, and I don't know whether that makes a whole lot of sense, but I think it's true that here in the U.S. every year the culture gets more and more hostile. And I don't mean hostile like angry, just it becomes more and more difficult to ask people to read or to look at a piece of art for an hour, or to listen to a piece of music that's complicated and that takes work to understand, because, well, there are a lot of reasons, but particularly now in computer and internet culture, everything is so fast, and the faster things go, the more we feed that part of ourselves, but don't feed the part of ourselves that likes quiet, that can live in quiet, that can live without any kind of stimulation. I don't know.
I suppose I have a real need to go and create a different world in my head. I just do. I'm driven to do that, yeah.
And was that why Harry Potter was what it was? Because you needed to create another world?
Yeah, and then I brought all the problems from this world into that world too. But it was a great way of examining those problems, to do it in that parallel, seemingly seemingly safer place, and it wasn't really safer at all.
I was taking a walk one day, and I happened to spot a little girl on the corner of my street. She was about 5 years old. She was sitting in the dirt at the edge of the road, talking to herself or to invisible friends and drawing in the dirt with a stick. And I thought, if I did that, somebody would come along and say, there's a grown man sitting in the dirt, talking to himself, to people who aren't there, and drawing with a stick, which is very close to what I do for a living, what people pay me to do. So the two things that I discovered and the two things that interest me about childhood, the first thing is that it's a secret world that exists by its own rules and lives in its own culture. And the second thing is that we forget what it is to be a child. We think in a different way as children. We tend to think around corners instead of in straight lines. Sometimes for a kid, the shortest distance between 2 points is not a straight line. And that's the way that we think in dreams. And I think that as children, we tend to live in this kind of dream state, and we've forgotten it in the same way. And because I equate that sort of dream state with a heightened sort of mental state, I make this easy cross-connection between childhood and strange powers, paranormal powers, or whatever. And it's been successful as a fictional device. When we deal with stories of the supernatural, whatever the supernatural element is, the mind sort of bifurcates, and the story begins to talk to us on two levels. And on the intellectual level, you grasp the fact that it is make-believe, but the subconscious grabs the story in a symbolic way, whether we like to or not. I'm not much when it comes to actual literal symbolism in stories, but I do realize that you're dealing here with things that substitute for other things, the way that in dreams, if you're dreaming about riding in a car and you're out of control, you're really dreaming about something else that has to do with your waking life. And the sensor changes it just enough for it to be acceptable to the front of the brain. And I think that in a lot of supernatural stories, we're dealing with fears that exist on a very practical level. And in between those two levels, the shout on top, where the make-believe is going on, and the whisper underneath, where the subconscious mind is saying, yes, but this could really happen if you just changed a few things.
Yeah.
That's where the story can succeed.
So, Orwell, I mean, you're a fan, right?
Yes. How shall I improve on that answer? I remember thinking, I wish I had known this guy. When I read him, it's as if I'm being personally addressed. He seems to have this transparent prose that communicates itself. It's partly because of intellectual honesty, but partly because of a certain intuition into the hidden injuries of the class system, for example. He wrote about families who are very like my own lower middle class English background. And I thought, I didn't think novels were written about people like us. And I sure didn't realize that he saw exactly what tensions and worries are. And I was very impressed by that. That was before I read Animal Farm in 1984, which I think they would have made me do at school. When I was about, I should think 14 or 15, it did confirm me that I was already coming to, that my life would be meaningless if I didn't become a writer. That it wasn't that I wanted to be, it was that it was a compulsion. It was that I had to do it. It chose me rather than I chose it, if that doesn't sound preposterous.
That's another version of everyone has a book in them.
Well, everyone does have a book in them, but in most cases, that's where it should stay.
I go to a video store in Prairie Village, Kansas. The youngsters who work there know me as the guy who wrote L.A. Confidential. They tell all the little old ladies who come in there to get their G-rated family flick. They come up to me. They say, "Oh, you wrote L.A. Confidential. What a wonderful movie. Kim Basinger was so beautiful. Is she a nice person?" "Yeah, she's all right." "It was a wonderful movie. Oh, what a wonderful movie. Is Kevin Spacey really gay? Oh, what a wonderful, wonderful movie. I saw it 4 times. You don't see storytelling like that on the screen anymore." I smile. I say, "Yes, it's a wonderful movie and a salutary adaptation of my wonderful novel. But listen, Granny, you'll love the movie. Did you go out and buy the book?" And Granny invariably says, "Well, no, I didn't." And I say to Granny, "Then what the fuck good are you to me?"
But a girl asked me at the launch of The Casual Vacancy in London, she said to me, "Do you write only when you're inspired?" And I said, "No, because I would have written a page and a half."
Exactly.
You know, and I said to her, "You've got to, I mean, it's people, some people don't want to hear that about writing. You're not sitting there taking dictation from from an angel.
Exactly.
You've got to work.
That's
it's about structure, it's about discipline, it's all these deadly things that your school teacher told you needed. You need it.
But what makes us different? Why are we sitting in a building that we've made, you know, rather than sitting outside while all the dogs are sitting in here, you know, or you know, all the lemurs and the squirrels sitting having meetings, and we're outside in the trees trying to figure out what to eat. You know, there is a difference. And the difference is that we have evolved this powerful sense of imagination, the ability to bring to mind things that aren't here. And from it flow all kinds of powers, like creativity, and uniquely and distinctively, the power of empathy. The ability to put yourself in somebody else's position and to imagine what that might be like. What happens in all times of conflict and cruelty is we shut empathy off so that we can do things that are unimaginable. And the way we avoid that is by kindling our imaginations and making those things unimaginable in turn.
For me, literature has always been a way of softening borders between people, breaking down projections, kind of taking big dismissive concepts and complicating them with actual human characters. So I think any of us could use that in a world that is, kind of dominated by what I would consider a fairly shallow and very pervasive mode of social media, in which you tend to think of the other person as an invisible, anonymous other who's sort of in opposition to you. Literature turns that around and says, no, actually the person you think is your enemy, regarded with enough affection, with enough time and care and love, will be seen to be very similar to you, actually. Even if they're quite different in the world, we emanate from the same root. So to me, this is a time when maybe a certain cultural tendency to minimize art or kind of treat it as a kind of indulgence is being called into question. But it's a time when we should recognize that art is actually the way people think best about the world. We think most deeply about the world when we're engaged in a work of art. And I quoted the great writer Tilly Olson, who has a beautiful short story called I Stand Here Ironing, in which she says of her daughter, the character's daughter, that she hopes that the daughter will just understand that she's not helpless like this dress under the iron. And I said that's one of the things that we, those of us who are concerned about the historical moment, can maybe reassure ourselves with the idea that we're not helpless and we're not alone, and that through literature and through intellectual engagement we can actually hold each other up in a difficult time. Regardless of your political inclination, literature is a force for communication and compassion, and at a time like this is maybe when we need it the most.
I mean, what wouldn't I give to have my mother see what happened? Oh, yeah. And it would have meant so much to her. I mean, she was such a reader and valued books and literature very, very highly, and the house was full of books because of my mother. So on that level, I mean, the human, the most personal level, as I say, what wouldn't I give? What's crazy about the situation is that if she hadn't died, the books wouldn't have been what they are. I'd been writing for 6 months before she died, and then I got to experience what Harry experienced. Mm. You know, I lost one of the people who meant most to me in the whole world, and as I say, the books would be very different if she'd lived.
The only reason I want to meet Shakespeare, or might even want to, is because I can meet him any time, because he is immortal in the works he's left behind. If you've read those, meeting the author would almost certainly be a disappointment. But when Socrates was sentenced to death for his philosophical investigations and for blasphemy, for challenging the gods of the city, and he accepted his death, he did say, well, if we are lucky, perhaps I'll be able to hold conversation with other great thinkers and philosophers and doubters too. In other words, that the discussion about what is good, what is beautiful, what is noble, what is pure and what is true could always go on. I want to live my life taking the risk all the time that I don't know anything like enough yet, that I haven't understood enough, that I can't know enough, that I'm always hungrily operating on the margins of a potentially great harvest of future knowledge and wisdom. I wouldn't have it any other way. Take the risk of thinking for yourself. Much more happiness, truth, beauty, and wisdom will come to you that way. Thank you.
I have a particular feeling for people, and many of these people now, of course, are in their early 20s, the people who grew up with Harry. Mm. So I think that my books occupied a special place in their lives. They grew up with Harry year on year, and now I'm meeting young adults who had that experience, and that's incredibly moving to meet people of that age who are standing there in front of you saying things like, or telling you what you meant in their childhood. I mean, I can't imagine anyone wouldn't be phenomenally moved by that. It's wonderful.
Once I get a publisher, I am a Pole, and so can you. will be available in bookstores everywhere, in hardcover, paperback, maybe even an ebook. What do you say about that, Maurice?
Them is what I say. I hate those ebooks. They cannot be the future. They may well be. I will be dead. I won't give a